In this tutorial, we're going to give you a detailed overview of how to create text and look at all of the options that we have available to edit text in the software. So let's just go to File, Close. So let's go and create a new file. So here we're going to go with the job size of 20 inches by 20 inches and our XY date and position will be in the lower left hand corner. Then we can simply go ahead and press OK. So we're going to look at the text creation and editing tools that we have available to use in the software. To access the tools, you need to be in the Drawing tab. Under Create Vectors section of the Drawing tab, we have a whole row here dedicated to text creation and editing. We have Draw Text, we have drawing text within a vector box, we have the ability to edit the text spacing and curve, we can look at converting text to curves, and we can look at wrapping text along a curve. So let's start by looking at Draw Text. So in the Draw Text tool, once you open it up, you'll be presented with the Create Text form. And here you'll be presented with a text box in the centre of your job. And this shows us the position of where our text will be entered. It outlines the size of the text, and then this dot here represents the text alignment position, and here it's in the centre. So I can simply type in some text and the software will automatically enter the text based on the current settings that I have within this text creation form. So to enter text, you simply click into this field here and you can simply type away, and I'll type in the word Vectric. And so the software will create the text based on the settings that we have here. Now not only can we type in text into our text field, but we could look at copying text from elsewhere, and then we could paste the text into the text field just by simply right clicking and then using the paste option. If you felt that you needed to work with a larger text field, you can use this larger edit option. That will open up a text box which you can then simply continue to type in here, and again you could look at pasting in text. So let's just cancel out of there. So working our way down the form, we have the font selection where we can choose a true type font or a single line font. So a true type font is any font that comes pre-installed with Windows, or a font that you have installed onto Windows. If you found a font that you like the look of that isn't installed onto your machine, then you can use the Windows Help function to guide you through installing that font. Then we have single line fonts. Single line fonts are fonts that we have installed as part of your software package. So let's start by looking at the true type fonts. So underneath here you'll see that we have a drop down list here, and that will display all of the different fonts that we have on our machine. Currently we have Cambria selected, and I can see the result of our Vectric text here in the 2D view with that font. The reason Cambria is chose is because that is the last font that I used. If you wanted to change the font, you can simply press on this down arrow key, and you can use this slider bar to scroll through all of the different fonts that we have available. You can select one, and if you wanted to, you can use the down arrow keys to get more of a visual understanding of what the font looks like with your text. Not only can you use the down arrow keys, but you can also look at using the scroller of your mouse. Now, if you knew the name of the font that you wanted to use, you can simply type in the first character of the font name, and that will take you to that section in the font list. For example, if I wanted to use the font Impact, I'd press the letter I on the keyboard, and you'll see it's taken me straight to Impact, and all of the I fonts are listed here. Okay, so we can choose Impact, and you'll see it's been applied like so. It's also worth noting that the software will remember the last 5 fonts that you used previously, and the number of fonts remembered can be edited in the Options dialog in the Edit tab. Now, if you wanted to create text for engraving purposes, then you'd select the single line fonts. So here you can specify from a list that we have here, so we'll just go with Helvetica 1L. Now, these single line fonts are great for when you're using conical engraving tools, as you can create a profile toolpath which goes down as deep as you specify along the vectors, producing a fast and efficient way for producing text for engraving purposes. So let's go back and take a look at the other options that we have available in the True Type font. So here we have a checkbox for bold and italic. So if you check bold, your text will be bold. Uncheck it and that will be normal. Check italic, your text will be italic. And then uncheck that to turn off italic mode. The next section we have is the text alignment. We have left, centre and right. And over in the 2D view, that's indicated by this blue square. We can see it's currently in the centre. We can see that because it's also applied here. And then that centre point, or the alignment of where our text is, will always be aligned to our anchor point, which is at X10, Y10. If you made that left, you'll see what will happen there. If you made that right aligned, you'll see that that will move that over there. So let's just put that back to the centre. So the next parameter we can change in the Create Text form is the text height. We can currently see that we have a text height of 4 inches, as it's telling us that in the box there. We can see what the 4-inch height of the text looks like here in the 2D view. If we wanted to change that, we could simply come in and type in a value. So I've put 3 in there, and it's automatically updated that in the 2D view. Not only can we alter the text height by entering values into this box, we could also look at the transformation tools. So we could take one of these handles, we could hold down Shift, make that bigger, and you'll see that the text height will update there. We can also shrink that down, and again the text height will update within the form. Now, not only can we alter the text by using the transform handles, we can also look at rotating the text using the blue handles on one of the corners, and we can rotate it. If we wanted to, we could continue to edit the text, and that will apply it at the rotation that we put in there. To undo any text that you create, you can simply just press Ctrl-Z and get it back into the state that you had that you were happy with. And so the last entry in the form is to specify an anchor point. And we can see that the current anchor point of our text is at X10, Y 9.7464. Now, if we wanted to, we could type in values to change the anchor point. For example, I could select the numbers that are in the Y box and change that to 10. So we have X10, Y10. And if we wanted to, whilst it's in transform mode, we could just make use of picking that text up and just moving it into a position that we like the look of, and you'll see that the anchor point will also update here within the form. So let's just put that back to 10, 10. And if I wanted to create new separate text entity, I can simply just click anywhere in the job, and that will display a new text box for me. I can see the position, I can see the size, I can see the alignment of the text before we even create it. So then, once you're happy with the text, you can simply close out of the form. And the software will always treat this text entity as a text object, which allows us to make further edits to the text by using any of the text manipulation tools. And until we're comfortable with the text that we've got, then we could look at turning the text to standard vectors if we needed to. So I'm going to select this text and we're going to go back into the Draw Text tool. And you can see that the software has picked up all of the properties of this text. So it's got the text in the text field, we know the font, its true type, its center, we know the height of it, we know its anchor point. And what I can do is I can make further edits to this if I wanted to. So I could create a new line. I could look at typing in the word software in there. If I wanted to, I could make it bold. I could look at making it italic. I could alter the height. I could alter the alignment. I could alter the anchor point. And this really demonstrates the usefulness of the software in that we can make edits to the text after we've originally created it, and the software will remember the settings previously used. So let's just close out of the form. We're going to take that text and we're just going to go ahead and delete it. So now we're going to look at how we can draw text within the confines of a closed vector. So to start with, we're going to look at creating a vector that we want to create text inside of. So let's go to the Create Vectors option and we'll look at drawing in a rectangle. So here I'm going to go with a width of 16, a height of 6 inches, and we'll make the anchor point of this 10 in X and 10 in Y. Press Create, close out, and there we have a rectangle that we can look at applying text inside the confines of that rectangle. So let's select our box and then we're going to come over to this option here, Draw Text within a vector box. And so all we have to do here is enter text into the text field, and the software will fit this text within the bounds of this vector box that we've got selected. Now, if we didn't select a closed vector to apply our auto layout text into, for example, if I just click in the space here, then the software will use the bounds of our job space to fit our text into instead. You can see we have the bounding box dimensions here with the width and the height. That's pulling that up from our job dimensions. And if I click on the rectangle, it's picking up the dimensions for our rectangle there. So let's look at applying some text. So in here, I'm going to type in Vectric, and then we'll create another line, and we're going to call this one software, and followed by for CNC. Okay, so there is our text, and again we can choose a font, whether that be a true type or a single line font. Again, it works exactly the same way, so it will remember the last fonts that you use. We can scroll through again using the arrow keys or the scroller of the mouse, and the font will update. So it's exactly the same as what I showed you earlier in the text creation form. Okay, so here you can also make your text bold, we can make it italic, do both at the same time. Then we have the option to look at your text alignment. So here you could align it to the left of the box, the center, the right. So I'll put that back in the center here. And then here we have bounding box dimensions. So as you saw earlier, it's picking up the bounds of our rectangle, and if we wanted to, we could alter the bounds here just by simply selecting the value and making the change by typing into the box. So here, let's say we change the height to 16. You can see we now have a 16 by 16 box that it's filling that text inside of. Okay, so we'll just put that back to 6. Then moving down, we have margin size. And so this is basically the space or the margin around our text within our bounding box. So we can see it's currently set to normal, and so we have a small margin or a small gap at the top. We also have a small gap at the bottom. If we set the margin size so that it has none, then what it does is it fills the whole height of the bounds and really just maximises the use of the space within our box, so we have no margin or no gap. Then we have the option to apply a wide margin size, and this is basically just a wider space than what we had when it was set to normal. So then we have two final options at the bottom of the form, and this is how we may want to stretch the text to better fit the bounds of our box. So we have vertical and we have a horizontal stretch. Now I'm actually quite happy with the vertical spacing of the text. It's filling this box quite okay, but what we may want to do is look at making use of the horizontal space, as we have quite a bit of space to the left and to the right of the text. So let's take a look at some of the options in the horizontal stretch. So in here we have the option to stretch the kerning, and with that selected you can see the effect there, and what it's done is it's created spaces in between the characters just to stretch the word out to fit the box. The other option we have is stretch characters. So stretch characters stretches the individual characters to fill more of that horizontal space within the bounds of the box. And these are all very useful ways to constrain text to a box, and these options will be very useful if you are making plaques or signs. So let's just close out there. I'm just going to box select these vectors and then hit delete on the keyboard. And now we're going to look at this third option here, where you can edit the text spacing and curve, and this enables us to kern text. So to show this feature I need some text, so let's just go into the draw text tool. We're just going to type in Vectric, so we'll make that capitals, and then we'll create another line and we'll call this one software. Okay, so the font will go with Times New Roman, and then we'll just basically move that over here, and then we'll just shift to bring that down. Okay, so something like that, and then we can simply close out there, and then I'm just going to center the text, so we'll press F9 on the keyboard. So the way that the software creates text is all down to the rules of the individual fonts. So you may find that the spacing between each one of these characters isn't always equal to each other. The same also applies to the height of the text, and that's all down to the fonts themselves. But what we can do is use the Edit Text Spacing and Curve tool to edit the spacing of the text to our own liking. So if we click on that option there, and our cursor is telling us that we are in text edit mode. So if we bring our cursor over to our text, you'll see that we are displayed with two arrows that are pointing at each other. So the idea is that if I click between two characters, it's going to bring those two characters close together, like so. Now the reverse of that is holding down Shift. So when I hold Shift down on the keyboard between two characters, you can see now that the arrows are pointing away from each other. When I click, you can see that the spacing has increased between the two characters. So to see that again, in between two characters, hold down Shift, the arrows are opposing each other. If we click, we create more space between the two characters. We also have the option to create space in between each of the characters at much greater increments, and the way you do this is by holding down the Control key on the keyboard and then pressing the left mouse key to do that. So you can see much greater increments there. We'll do that again over here, and then the reverse of that to send characters away from each other is holding down Shift and then holding down Control for the greater increments and then clicking to create that, and we'll do the same over here. So hold down Shift, the arrows are now opposing, hold down Control for much larger increments, and you can see that we've done that there. And so the idea is that you'll work your way through each character, adjusting the spacing until it looks okay. So we'd bring the E and the C close together, the C and the T and the R. I want to move the R and the I further away from each other, so hold down Shift to increase that. I might actually want to do that here as well, so Shift to increase the space in between the T and the R there. I bring the I and the C closer together like this, and then between the S and the O, we'll click into there. The O and the F, I bring that closer together. And this feature is really useful for fonts that have serifs. For example, the F and the T, what we could do is look at increasing the spacing just until it looks right, that you have a nice space in between the two characters. Okay, space between the T and the W, might bring the W and the A closer together. The A and the R looks okay, maybe the R and the E can come a little bit closer together also. Also, because we have two lines in our text box, if I put my cursor in between the two lines, I have a different cursor. And this applies the same rules, but the spacing is applied to the two lines. For example, I could bring them closer together by clicking. I can move them further away by holding down Shift, and you'll see the arrows are pointing in the opposite direction to each other. I could click to apply that. Again, we can make that in larger increments, so I could hold down Control and bring the two together like so. Control and Shift to bring them further apart, and you can see that I can just continuously make all sorts of edits to the spacing in between the characters as well as between lines of text. Now, if we had text that was in single lines, then we'd have more options to edit the text using this tool. So if you wanted to break up your text into lines, you simply right click, use the option break text block into lines, and then when I click you can see that they are now two separate entities. So now that we are working with single line text, I'm displayed with a green node at the top, transform handle in the center, and a green node at the bottom. Transform handle allows me to move my text. The green node at the top, when I hover over it, my cursor is displayed as an arc with an arrow pointing up. If I left mouse click and then drag my mouse up, you can see that it will curve the text. I can bring that down and put it straight again. Then at the bottom we have the opposite, so we have a curve and an arrow down icon, and when I click on that you'll see that it will create a curve going down. Okay, so let's just take that back up. So we're going to take this green handle and we're just going to put in a curvature, something like that. And with this curved text, you can see that it's impacted the spacing between each of the characters. So whilst we're still in this mode, we can edit the spacing as I showed you earlier to create better spacing between each of the characters, and it will just basically follow along the curve that we've created. So here I can bring the V and the E close together, the E and the C, C and the T, T and the R. R and the I is okay. Might want to look at bringing the I and the C closer together. And again, all the other options of holding down Shift to increase the spacing works as you saw earlier. Okay, so now that we've added some curvature, you'll also notice that we have two further edit indicators. We have these red handles and we also have these blue handles. And so if I click on either one of these red handles and use my mouse to move that, what happens is the software allows me to move the text along the curve. And if I wanted to be specific about the increments at which the text is moving along the curve, then I can also hold down Control. So holding down Control and then selecting one of the red handles will enable me to move our text along the curve in increments of 15 degrees. Okay, looking at the blue handle now, if I select either one of these handles and then use my mouse, what happens is we're basically increasing or decreasing the curve radius. We can increase it as much as we like, or we could decrease it to the point that our text becomes a full circle. So if I just zoom out so we can see that, I can bring that right down until it's at the full circle there. I can bring that back up to put that into the curve. So let's use this option here to zoom active view to the drawing limits. So there you can see that we've demonstrated lots of different ways that we can edit the spacing of our text. Now if I wanted to edit the contents of the text, I can do so by selecting the text and going back in to the text creation tool. And you can see that the software still recognises the Vectric text as a text entity. And if I wanted to, I could look at adding the word software to the text, and you can see that the software is maintaining the radius and the text height. If we go ahead and delete the word software there, but instead we wanted to change the font, say to impact, you can see it changes the font and it still maintains the curve. Right then, so let's just close out of there. On some occasions you may just want to edit just one letter. For example, if you wanted to make the S of the word software larger than the rest of the characters, then we'd need to look at converting the text to standard vectors, and then we'd look at using the various transform object tools to edit the individual characters. So let's select the word software. I'm going to come over and use this fourth option here, convert to curves. So this will take the text and it will turn the text entity into standard vectors. So if we click on that, you can see that we're now able to access individual characters as they are now standard vectors. And so it's important to remember that once you have converted your text to curves, the software no longer sees this as a text entity, and therefore you will not be able to edit the text as we have done previously in the Draw Text tool. So with those vectors selected, if we go over to the text tool, then we're presented with an empty field, and we need to enter new text in because it doesn't recognize this software word as a text entity, as it is just standard vectors. So let's just close out there. So now that we have converted the text to standard vectors, we can look at making edits using the vector editing tools. So let's take the letter S, select it again to put it into transform mode. Taking one of those handles, we can make that much larger than the rest of the characters. And this is something that we wouldn't have been able to do using the standard text edit tools. We can also look at transforming this further using node edit mode. So let's put that into node edit mode. We'll just zoom in there. We could look at pulling this out. We could make that a curve, so we'll smooth that point, pull on the handles, so that we're really transforming the shape of the letter S. Now, if you wanted to go back to put the text into a text state, then we would have to use the undo command until it's in text mode. So to do that, simply come over, use the undo option like so. We continue to do that till we have it like so, and then we could click just to check. Okay, so clicking on that S, you can see it's popped up this message where it's telling us we're unable to node edit text, and we can't do that because it's a text entity. We can only node edit standard vectors, so that we know we've undone the commands and the software is now in a state of text. So we'll just press no here, right click to come out of node edit mode. Then we can take the software text, we can go back into the draw text option, and then again we could look at further editing the text here. So here we could go and alter the font. I'm going to press B on the keyboard. I'm going to search for the brush script font so I can apply that like we have here. I'll make the text height 4 inches in there, Then we'll close out of the form, and with that text selected, we're just going to use this option here to zoom active view to selected objects. Now, some of the functions in the software require us not to have overlapping vectors, and this is especially true when it comes to toolpathing. However, sometimes this cannot be helped, and this can be down to the type of font that we may be using. For example, the word software here has tails going to and from the next character, and this is where the overlapping can become quite a bit of a problem, and there are things in the software that we can do to overcome this issue. Some toolpaths, such as the V10 toolpath, would require us to have one continuous vector to cut in between, which the V10 toolpath actually handles this internally without us having to weld the text. And so it would create a toolpath as if it were one continuous vector. However, there are many times with script fonts where characters overlap, we may be left with a few inconsistencies. For example, if we zoom in between the A and the R, you can see that where the two tails cross, we would be left with a rather unattractive join. And so ideally, we would want to look at welding the text and then fixing areas like this using the node edit tools to create smooth transitions between each of the characters. Okay, so let's just use that option there to zoom to our selected object. So now we'll look at welding the text, as well as showing you an example of how we could fix the inconsistencies between the A and the R. So with that text selected, let's go over to Edit Objects and use the Weld option. Okay, so you're going to see a message saying that some objects such as text or distorted objects are converted to curves for this operation. So as this is a text entity, software is telling us that we need to convert the text to curves in order for us to weld the text together. But we have the option where we can replace that, so we can just convert it to curves, or we could look at keeping the original, so we'll keep the original text entity as well as creating a newly created object, which is a welded version of the text that's converted to curves. In this case, we'll just hit replace there. Okay, so you can see that it's welded the text there, and then if we zoom in to where the A and the R is, you can see more clearly those inconsistencies there. And so if we was to V-carve this originally without having welded this, it would include these inconsistencies. So in cases like this, you just want to look at cleaning this up just to smooth that out, in which case we'd look at using the node edit mode. Here, I just simply right click on that point and delete it. Also look at deleting that point. Then we could look at right clicking to delete that point and right clicking to delete this point, in which case you can then leave it as it is, or we could look at further editing that by extending that handle just to increase the curvature there. And if we put that back into normal selection mode, you can see we have a nice smooth transition between the A and the R. So let's just use this option here to zoom active view to the selected object. Now we're going to look at the last option amongst the text creation and edit tools, and this option gives us the ability to wrap text along a curve. Okay, so it enables us to create text, and then using a separate vector we can wrap the text onto the vector. So let's use this option here to zoom active view to the drawing limits. I'm just going to box select all of these vectors. We're just going to hit delete on the keyboard. Then we're going to come over and we're going to look at drawing in some text. So here I'm just going to position that somewhere around there. I'm going to type in the word software like so, change the font, we'll make that Arial, change the height to 2 inches, then we could press close. Next we're going to create a curve in order for us to wrap our software text onto. So I'm going to come over, I'm going to use this option here to draw a curve, and here I'm just going to create 4 points, and you'll see that it will just create a nice smooth transition between each one of those points. And right click to come out of there. Now we have our software text along with our curve that we'd like to wrap it to. And so we select our text, Shift and select the curve, and then use this option here to wrap text along a curve. Okay, so in here we've got lots of different options in order for us to control how we are wrapping the text to the curve. Okay, so we have options to alter the text size, options to alter the spacing of the text, the position of the text, how we align the text. So let's start at the top and we'll work our way down the form. Okay, so the first option we have is text size. We have maintain text size, which just maintains the height of the text that we originally used. Or we have the option to scale the text to fill the curve. Okay, so you can see at 100% it's using that text to fill the entirety of the curve. We can reduce that using the slider, and the more we reduce it, the smaller the text becomes. Okay, so in this case I'm just going to go back to maintain the text size. So then we move on to text spacing. I have a slider here where I can increase the spacing of the characters, I can decrease them like so. Okay, so I'm just going to put that back over there. Next we have the option to alter the text position. So this area of the form is fairly self-explanatory through the imagery that we have here. So we can have the text above the curve, so the text is sitting on top of the vector curve that we've got. We could apply it so that it's on the curve, like so, or we could place it so that it is below the curve. We also have the option to apply text on the other side, which it will do that. We can uncheck that to accept that. We can just put that back so that it's above the curve. Here we can apply an offset distance, so we could create a space in between the text and the curve. For example, I could type in 1/4 of an inch in there and it will create that 1/4 inch gap in between the text and the curve. Then we have text alignment. So again, you can see by the imagery that we have left. That will just align all the text to the left side of the curve. Right aligns it to the right hand side of the curve, and the middle will keep that to the middle. You can also move your position using this blue handle. If we left align it, we can do that also. It just gives you more options on how you want to edit your text on your curve. And two final options: you can align the text to the curve as it is now, so the characters are aligned to the text as it curves through, or we could keep the characters vertically aligned to the text like we have here. So I'm going to put that back so it's aligned to the curve there. And so once you're happy with the settings that you have, we can just close out of the form and continue on with your project. What's nice about the wrap text feature is that I can actually go ahead and delete the curve vector that we originally wrapped the text to. I can take our text, I can move it around, and if I wanted to edit any of the settings, I can just go back into the wrap tool where it will remember all of the settings that we applied originally. And so here I could say I don't want an offset in this case, and then that will apply that for me there. Okay, so let's just close out there. It's also worth noting that I can make further edits to the spacing using the kern tool. And here, remember, hold down Shift to create the space, and you can see that it's still maintaining the original curve that we've wrapped the software text to. Now, say if I wanted to add more text to what we currently have, then what we could do is we could simply take the text and then we could go into the Draw Text tool, and the software still views this as a text entity, and so you can see it's picked it up in the form. And if I wanted to, I could add further text to this. So for example, let's go and type in the word software again, and you can see that as I'm adding more text, the text is being scaled to fit the curve that we originally wrapped the text to. And as we create more text, it's still maintaining the original curve. Now, if you decided that you wanted to delete some of the text that you added on, then it's going to keep the text at the size that we've now shrunk it down to fill the curve. And so if you didn't want the text at this new height, then we'd simply look at using the undo command to put it back to its original state. So now I'm going to show you how we can wrap text to a circle. So let's take that text and we're just going to delete it using the delete key. So we need to draw a circle to begin with. I'm going to go the circle that is 10 inches in diameter, close out. Now I need to create some text. Here I'm going to type in the word Vectric followed by the word software, close out there. Now I want the word Vectric to wrap along the top of the circle, and I want the word software to wrap along the bottom of the circle. So this will require me to break our text block into two different lines. So if we right mouse click, I'm going to use this option here to break text block into lines. So now I have Vectric as one text entity. I'm just going to drag that up there, and then we've got the word software as a separate entity there, and we're just going to put that over here. Now when we wrap text to a circle or any given shape, there is no way for the software to determine where it is that you want the text to begin wrapping from. Now I want Vectric wrapping along the top and software wrapping along the bottom, and the way that the software wraps text is all down to the start point of the vector that we are wrapping along. So let's take the circle and we'll just put that into node edit mode. And so we can see that the start point is here, and looking at this arrow we know it's going in anti-clockwise motion. And so if we was to wrap the word Vectric, it would start this point going this way around the curve. And so what we need to do is we need to look at breaking up our circle into two different vectors, and that will require us to cut that at this point here and this point here, so we can wrap the word Vectric to the top, and we can wrap the word software to the bottom. So to do that, let's just go over here and we're going to right mouse click and use the option to cut the vector. Here we're going to right mouse click and also use the option to cut vector. So now we have two separate vectors there. And so if we were to wrap the word software to the bottom curve, it will do so in this direction, as that's where the start point is. And if we was to take the Vectric word and wrap that along this curve, the start point is here, and so it would do so in this direction. Now for the purpose of this example, I'm actually going to make the start point for the top curve this node here. So we'll make that the start point, and you'll see why I've done that shortly. Right then, so let's come out of node edit mode and we'll put that back into normal selection mode. So let's take the word software, we'll shift and select the bottom curve, and we'll go ahead and look at wrapping the text to the curve. Okay, so you can see here that according to these settings, that's how it has applied our text. Okay, now I want the text actually going underneath the curve. So we'd look at using the below curve option. If I wanted to, I could look at applying an offset distance of 1/4 of an inch in there, and you can see that it's done that there. So let's just close out, and then if we just take a look again at the node edited version of our curve, and as I mentioned, our start point is here, traveling in this direction, and that's why the word software is also traveling in that direction. It's all down to where your start point is. So let's take a look at using the Vectric text and aligning it to this curve. Now remember, we made the start point on the right hand side for this one. So let's take the text, shift and select the vector. We'll go over and wrap text along the curve. Okay, so you can see that the text is actually starting from this side going round, and again that's all down to the start point. So one way of overcoming or fixing this is to use this option here, text on the other side, and that will just be a quick fix if you ever come into this sort of issue. And again, we could go ahead and we could look at applying an offset, 1/4 of an inch. We can close out. And again, what we can do is we can further edit the text. So we can take the text there. We could look at maybe changing all of these characters to lowercase, and the text will still maintain that curve. Okay then, so let's just box select everything and we'll just delete those vectors. So now we're going to look at lots of different options for us to edit text using the transformation tools. So first off, let's go and create some text. So here we're just going to type in Vectric. We'll make the height 3 inches. We'll just close out there. So with that text, I can select it to put it into transformation mode. I can move it. I can alter the height of it. I can shrink it down if I wanted to. I could look at rotating the text. I could then look at stretching that rotation. And all of the different changes that I'm making to the text will be maintained when we come to edit the text. So with that selected, if I go in to edit the text here, I could look at adding in the word limited, and it's picked up all of the sizing information that we applied to the original Vectric text and all of the transformations, and it's continuing that as I create new text. So here I could continue to make more text, so we could put Vectric software for CNC, and you can see when I zoom out of here that it has maintained everything as we did when we originally changed the transformations of the word Vectric. So let's just close out there, and we're just going to undo all of those changes until we have it back to its original state. Okay, so put that in there and take this and use the F9 key on the keyboard to put that in the center. Now I'll use this option here to zoom active view to draw in limits. So now we're going to look at how we can distort text to really transform the shape of what we've got there. And so to do that, we select our text and we come over to transform objects, and we can look at distorting selected objects. Okay, so we've got 3 options in here. We've got the bounding box, okay, and this basically takes a bound of our object, which we can then distort to really change the shape. We have a single curve which wraps the text to a curve, and then we can distort the curve. And then we have between 2 curves, and we'll come to this one later. For now, we're just going to focus on the bounding box option. So let's press apply. So here we can see the bounding box, and this allows us to make transformations to the shape of the box, and in turn then transforms and distorts the text inside of the box. Now the way that we edit the shape of the box is exactly the same as how we would edit any ordinary vector using node edit mode. For example, I could take the node, move that up, and you can see that the bounding box shape has changed, and it's also changed the text inside. We can also look at altering the span. So again, like you would in node edit mode, right click. Let's say for example we wanted to change this span into a Bezier span. We'd use that option there, in which case we can then alter the handles. And as we're altering the box, it's really transforming the text that's inside it. So once you're happy with your distortion, you can simply close out. And you'll notice that the Vectric text is no longer a text entity, and the reason for this is that we've saved this object from a state of text into a state of distortion, and when I go into the draw text tool, you see it no longer picks this up in the text field. Now we can further edit this shape if we wanted to by selecting it and going back into the distort tool. And then we can use this option here to edit the envelope, which we can make further edits to if we wanted. You can see that I can continuously make those edits until I'm happy. Now, once you are happy with your distortion, then you could go ahead and bake it. And so this will allow us to access each individual character in order for us to further edit it if we wanted to. Right then, so we're just going to box select all of this, and we could go ahead and delete it. So now we're going to look at how we can distort text between 2 curves. So let's go back into draw text. I'm going to type in the word Vectric. We'll just press F9 on the keyboard to center that. Now I need to draw in 2 curves, so I'm going to look at using the arc tool I'm going to snap in place one point and then click to put in another point. I'm just going to make a shallow curve like so. Close out there. I'm going to take that vector, use the mirror tool, I'm going to flip that about the job center, create a mirrored copy, and we're going to flip that vertically, then we can close out. So now I've got my text and I've got my two curves. So with the text, let's go back into the Distort tool, and then we're going to look at this option here between two curves. The moment it's telling me we have an invalid selection, we have no curve selected. So let's hold down Shift to select the top curve, Shift to select the bottom curve, and you'll see now it's telling us that we are okay to do that. Then we'll go ahead and press Apply. Okay, so here we have quite an interesting result. Okay, now the way that this tool works is you select your text followed by the curve that you want your text to sit onto, followed by the top curve. Okay, now I've selected the curves in a backwards order, and so the text is actually aligning to our first curve, and we can see the direction of our start point is this way, hence why we have upside down and backwards text. So let's just use the Edit, Undo, Distort Object tool. Now this time we're going to select our text. We're going to Shift to select the bottom vector first, Shift to select the top, and we'll go ahead and press Apply, and there is something more what we were expecting. Okay, so it's now following the first curve that we selected in the direction of the start point. Okay, now here I can look at editing the bounds of the curve, so I can move that up, I can bring this down if I wanted to, and you'll notice that it's not interfering with the original vectors that we used to create this distortion. Okay, so let's just go ahead and undo that, undo it again. We'll just put it back into normal text. We'll close out here. Now we're going to look at how we can distort text between two varied curves. So we'll take this vector here, and we'll delete that. So let's use this option here to draw a curve. So I'm going to sketch in a curve like that. Then we're going to take that, use the mirror tool, flip about job center, create a mirrored copy and flip vertically. I'm going to undraw create a mirrored copy, and we're going to flip that vector horizontally. We can close out, then we can select the word, we can come over to the Distort tool, between two curves, Shift and select this vector first, Shift and select that vector second, and then go ahead and press Apply. Okay, so the text is backwards, so like before, we have our start point on the right hand side because we mirrored that vector where we flipped it horizontally, and so the start point is on the right hand side. So what we need to do is we need to close out there, we need to undo that using Ctrl Z, go into this vector, node edit, right click, make start point, and then we can take our text into the Distort tool, between two curves, Shift and select the bottom, Shift and select the top, press Apply, and there we have the text. And then we could go ahead and we could look at editing the envelope by simply pulling on the handles like you can see here. And again, you can see that as I am making the changes, we're not actually interfering with the curve vectors that we used to distort this text. So once we're happy, we could go ahead and bake that. We can close out, then we can take the original curves, just select them and use the delete key to delete them. And so that completes this guide on how to create and edit text in the software. And there are many tutorials available that cover the tools that we've shown you in this tutorial in practical project examples.